I don't sleep much anymore. Haven't for years, really. I just sit here, in this chair, in the dark mostly, and I let the night do what it wants to do. Sometimes there's a little light from the street coming through the curtain. Sometimes I can hear a car go by. Sometimes nothing. Just the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the sound of my own breathing and everything I've ever done sitting right here with me in the dark. I'm 73 years old, and there are things I never told anybody. Not my wife, God rest her. Not my son. Not the people at church who think they know me, who shake my hand and say my name like it belongs to somebody good. I let them think that. I let everybody think whatever they needed to think. That was always easy for me. Easier than the truth. The truth is something else. I was 7 years old the day my father left me on a street corner in downtown Memphis. I didn't know it was Memphis then. I didn't know what city it was. I didn't know anything, except that it was hot. The kind of hot that makes the concrete shimmer. And he had told me to wait right there, right on that spot, right next to that metal newspaper stand that had a picture of somebody on the front page I couldn't read. And he said he would be right back. He said he would be right back. I can still feel that sidewalk heat coming up through the soles of my shoes. I can still feel the way I stood there, straight, the way a little boy stands when he's trying to be good, trying to be the kind of boy his father comes back for. I had a paper bag in my hand. I don't remember what was in it. Something small. Something he had handed me to carry, because I was old enough to carry things, he said. I stood there holding that bag, and I watched the crowd move around me, and I watched the door he had walked through, and I waited. I waited for a long time. People walked past me, a woman with a big hat, a man talking to himself, 2 boys running, laughing about something, and I watched them go, and I thought about running too, just to have somewhere to go. But I didn't move, because he had said that spot, right there, don't move. So I didn't move. I think it was a couple of hours. I don't know for certain. Time does strange things when you're a child waiting for something that isn't going to come. At some point, I sat down on the curb. I put the paper bag between my feet. The sun started moving, and the shadow of the building changed, and the street got a little louder, and then a little quieter, and I understood something. Sitting there, I understood it in my body before I understood it in my mind. He wasn't coming back. I don't know how a 7-year-old knows that, but I knew it. There was a moment, a specific moment I can still locate somewhere in my chest when I stopped looking at that door, when I stopped counting seconds, when I just sat there and felt the thing settle over me like a weight, not crying, not yet, just sitting with the knowing of it. His name was Curtis Earl Beaumont, and I have not said that name out loud to another person in 40 years, not because I forgot it. Lord knows I never forgot it. Because some names are not meant to be spoken anymore. Some names you just carry in a locked box inside you, and you carry it so long it becomes part of the weight of yourself, part of the way you move through the world. A woman found me. Her name was Margaret Holloway, and she was 44 years old, and she worked at a dry goods store 3 blocks from where I was sitting, and she was walking home, and she saw me, and she stopped. She had a round face, and she smelled like lavender and sweat and something cooked, something warm, and she crouched down to my level the way adults do when they're trying not to frighten a child, and she said, "Baby, are you lost?" And I said no, because I wasn't lost. I knew exactly where I was. I was right where he told me to stand. The lost one was him. She took me to the police station, and then to a family services office, and then through a chain of people and paperwork and phone calls I didn't understand, I ended up at the home of James and Ruth Calhoun on Prescott Street in North Memphis. And that house, that yellow house with the green shutters and the garden in the back that Ruth tended every single morning on her hands and knees like it was something sacred, that house became the place where I grew up. James Calhoun was a high school history teacher. Ruth was a nurse. They had one daughter, Denise, who was 12 when I arrived, and who looked at me from across the living room with an expression that I couldn't read, and that I now understand was simply surprise. They had never fostered a child before. I don't think they planned on it. But Ruth had gotten a call from someone who knew someone, the way things worked in those communities then, and she had said yes before she fully thought it through. And then she honored that yes every single day for the rest of her life. I want to say that clearly, because Ruth deserved to have it said clearly. She honored that yes every single day. I wasn't an easy child. I need to say that too. I didn't cry or throw things or cause trouble the way people might expect. I was quiet, too quiet. I sat in corners and I watched things, and I didn't trust any room I couldn't see all four walls of. I flinched sometimes when James moved quickly, not because he ever raised a hand to me. He never did. But my body had its own memory, and my body remembered things my mind was still sorting through. Ruth was patient with me in a way I didn't deserve. She didn't push. She just kept showing up, kept putting food on the table, kept knocking on my bedroom door at night to say goodnight, even when I didn't answer. Just that knock, just that voice. "Good night, Samuel." And then quiet, and then morning. After a while, I started answering. After a while, I started eating at the table with them, instead of asking to take my plate to my room. After a while, Denise started teasing me the way sisters tease, the way that means you've been accepted, the way that means you belong. And I didn't know what to do with that at first, but I learned. I learned slowly. James taught me to read properly. He sat with me at the kitchen table 3 nights a week for almost 2 years, and he never once made me feel stupid. He had this way of explaining things, patient and clear, not talking down, just talking, like he was sharing something he genuinely loved. He taught me history, and I loved history, because history was the one subject where you could look at what people did and trace where it all went wrong without anybody pretending it didn't happen. I grew up in that house. I became Samuel Calhoun, not by law at first, later by adoption when I was 12, but I was Samuel Calhoun in my bones long before any paper said so. I played basketball in the driveway. I argued with Denise about what to watch on television. I helped Ruth in the garden and learned the names of things, the proper names, not just flower, but zinnia, not just tree, but magnolia. And she said the names like they mattered, and so I learned to say them like they mattered too. I did well in school, not brilliantly, not the kind of well that makes teachers tell stories about you, just steady, consistent. I learned that steady was something. I learned that showing up every day and doing the work was a form of dignity that nobody could take from you. I went to college, Tennessee State, studied business administration, graduated in 1973, got a job at an accounting firm in Nashville, married a woman named Gloria in 1976, and she was wonderful. She was difficult. She was real. She was everything a person actually is when you live with them for 37 years. We had a son named Marcus, and I loved him the way I didn't know I was capable of loving anything. I built a life. I need you to understand that, because what comes next only makes sense if you understand that I built a real life, not a perfect one, not one without its failures and its distances and its silences that went on too long, but a real one, a life with weight and texture and people in it who loved me and who I loved back imperfectly, the way people do. I was 31 years old the day I saw my father again. It was a Saturday, March, one of those early spring days in Nashville where the cold isn't gone, but the light has changed, that thin new light, that tentative light. I was walking back from the hardware store. I had a bag of things I needed to fix something at the house, something small, a door latch or a faucet handle. I don't remember. I was in no particular hurry. I was just walking. And there he was. He was sitting on a low wall outside a gas station. He had a paper cup in his hand. He was wearing clothes that were too big for him, and his face was different, older, thinner, something hollowed out about it. But I knew him. I knew him the way, you know, something that's been inside you for 24 years, not with my eyes first, with something older than eyes. I stopped walking. He didn't see me. He was looking at the ground. He was just sitting there, with his cup and his two big clothes, and I stood maybe 30 feet away from him, and I felt every single year of the distance between that Memphis street corner and this moment compress into something I could barely breathe around. Curtis Earl Beaumont. He looked up, and I watched his face go through something. Recognition, I think. Some version of it. A flicker. And then he looked back down. He looked back down at the ground, and he lifted his cup, and he took a sip of whatever was in it, and he did not say a word. He knew who I was, and he looked back down. I walked past him. I kept walking. I got to my car, and I put the hardware bag on the passenger seat, and I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, and I breathed. In and out. Just breathed. The way you do when something has happened that is too large to immediately be a feeling, when it's still just a fact, when it hasn't become anything yet. I drove home. I fixed whatever I had gone to the hardware store to fix. I ate dinner with Gloria, and I helped Marcus with his homework, and I went to bed at a normal time, and I lay in the dark next to my sleeping wife, and I did not sleep. I didn't sleep for about 3 days. Not the way I don't sleep now, in this quiet, old man way, this gentle insomnia. This was different. This was my mind, running a track. It couldn't stop running. This was my whole body vibrating with something I didn't have a name for yet. Or maybe I did have a name for it. Maybe I just didn't want to say it yet. Because the name was rage. Not the hot kind. Not the kind that makes you break things. The other kind. The kind that is cold and still and very old and has been waiting a long time for permission. The kind that knows how to be patient because it learned patience from the child who stood on a street corner in the Memphis heat for 2 hours holding a paper bag waiting for a man who was never coming back. I found out where he lived. I want to be careful about how I tell this part. Not because I'm ashamed of all of it, but because some of it, if I tell it badly, sounds like something it wasn't. And I want to tell it correctly, which means I have to tell it slowly. I asked around. Nashville was a city, but it wasn't that big a city. And in the black community, then there were always threads connecting people, always someone who knew someone. I found out that Curtis Beaumont had been in Nashville for almost 8 years, that he had married a woman named Donnell, that they had 2 sons, 19 and 22, that he worked off and on, maintenance work mostly, nothing steady, that they lived in a rental house in a neighborhood I knew. I sat with all of that information for a long time. He had sons. He had built a second family. Or maybe not even a second one. Maybe the first one. Maybe I had never been anything but a mistake that he had shed like old skin on a Memphis street corner and moved on from without looking back. Maybe that was the thing that kept me awake. Not just that he had left me, but that he had left me and then continued. That he had kept living. That he had found someone and made children with her and named them and raised them and watched them grow and done all the things he hadn't done for me. And maybe that woman, Donnell, didn't know I existed. That thought came to me like something cold dropped in my stomach. Maybe she had no idea. Maybe those boys had no idea they had a half-brother somewhere in Nashville who had spent 24 years carrying the weight of their father's abandonment. Maybe Curtis Earl Beaumont had built a whole new life on the silence of what he had done to me. And that was when I decided. Not in a dramatic way, not standing up with my fists clenched or making some kind of vow. I was just sitting at the kitchen table early one morning with a cup of coffee gone cold and Gloria still asleep upstairs and the house quiet. And I decided, very simply, very quietly, I was going to dismantle that silence. I need to explain what I mean by that because it matters. I didn't want to hurt anybody physically. That was never in me. James Calhoun had raised me better than that, and Ruth Calhoun had loved me better than that. And even if they hadn't, it still wasn't in me. What I wanted was something else. I wanted exposure. I wanted him to have to look at what he had done. I wanted the people around him to know who they were really living with. I wanted the lie he had built his life on to collapse. I started slowly. I told myself I was just gathering information. I drove past their house a few times. A small place, well kept enough. A car in the driveway, some flowers along the front walk that I assumed Donnell tended, because Curtis didn't seem like a man who tended flowers. I watched the rhythms of the place, when people came and went, what the neighborhood was like. I'm not proud of those weeks, but I'm not going to pretend they didn't happen either. I found out that Donnell worked at a medical billing office downtown. I found out that the older son, the 22-year-old, whose name was Deshawn, worked at an auto parts store. I found out that the younger one, Terrence, was in his second year at a community college. I found out that Curtis went to a bar on Fridays, the same bar every Friday, with a man I eventually learned was his brother-in-law, Donnell's brother. They'd be there from about 5 until 8 or 9. That was his routine, steady as anything. A man with no steady job but steady hours at a bar every Friday. I went in one Friday. I sat down 3 stools away from him, and I ordered a beer, and I waited. He saw me almost immediately. I could feel it, that same flicker I had seen on the street. And then the thing I hadn't expected, fear. Plain fear, moving across his face like weather, and he looked away, and I watched him decide to pretend he didn't see me, and I let him. I let him decide that. And then, after about 10 minutes, I moved one stool closer. He stiffened. His brother-in-law, a large, friendly-looking man named Ronnie, was talking about something on television, not noticing anything, just talking. And Curtis was nodding along, like everything was fine, and I moved one more stool, and I said, quietly, just to him, without looking at him, just talking in the direction of my beer. I said, I remember you. He didn't say anything. Ronnie kept talking. I said, I remember standing on a corner, waiting for you for 2 hours. I was 7 years old. I had a paper bag in my hand. Still nothing. I said, I just want you to know that I know who you are, and I want you to know that I'm deciding what to do about it. And then I got up, and I paid for my beer, and I left. I drove home, and I sat in my car in my own driveway for a long time. The lights were on in the house. I could see the television flickering through the curtain. Gloria was in there. Marcus was probably in his room. My life was in there. Everything James and Ruth had given me, everything I had built on top of what they gave me, it was all in that house, all lit up, all real. And I had just put something into motion that I didn't know how to stop. What I did next was the part I think about most, not because it was the worst thing, but because it was the most deliberate thing, the most calculated, the most me. I wrote a letter. I wrote it by hand, 3 pages. I explained everything. Who I was, who Curtis was, what had happened on that Memphis street in the summer of 1956, what it had meant, what the years had been. Not angry, not accusatory, in a ranting way. Just facts, just the truth in clean, simple sentences, the way James Calhoun had taught me to write, clear and precise, no extra words. I addressed it to Danelle Beaumont. I included my name and my phone number. I sent it. I didn't tell Gloria what I had done. I want to say that now, because it's important. Gloria was my wife, and I kept this from her, and that was a choice I made, and it was the wrong choice, and I knew it was the wrong choice when I made it, and I made it anyway. Some things you do in the dark because you can't bear to do them in the light. Because to do them in the light means someone you love has to see all of you, and some parts of yourself you're not ready to be seen. I told myself I would tell her when it was over, but I didn't know when it was going to be over, or what over even meant. 3 days after I sent the letter, my phone rang. It was Danelle. Her voice was, I don't have a precise word for what her voice was, steady but barely. The steadiness of someone who has just been handed something devastating and has decided not to fall down in front of a stranger. She said, Mr. Calhoun. I said, yes, Mum. She said, I read your letter twice. I said I hoped she didn't mind me writing. She said, did he know about you? I said, yes, Mum. He knew. There was a long pause. She said, I have to ask you something. Did you write this letter to hurt me? And I had to sit with that question, because it was the right question, the honest question, and it deserved an honest answer, not the convenient one. I said, I wrote it because I needed someone to know the truth. And I'm sorry that someone had to be you. She cried, not loudly, just a sound, brief, quickly controlled. And then she said, thank you, and she hung up. I don't know everything that happened in that house after that phone call. I can only imagine it. I have imagined it many times, in this chair, in the dark. Danelle going to find Curtis, Danelle with my letter. What she said. What he said. Whether he denied it or whether he didn't even try. I know from what happened later that he didn't deny it. I know, because about a week after Danelle called me, Deshawn called me. He was 22 years old, and his voice was like standing water. Very still. Very flat, and he said, "My name is Deshawn Beaumont." I said, "I know." He said, "My mama told me and my brother what you wrote." I said, "I'm sorry that the truth came that way." He said, "I'm not calling to talk about sorry. I'm calling because I want to know if it's true, all of it, and I want you to tell me yourself." So I told him everything, from the beginning, the paper bag, the street corner, the 2 hours, Margaret Holloway and the police station and James and Ruth. All of it, clear and steady, the way you tell a truth when you've been carrying it long enough that it's become a kind of calm. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How old were you?" I said, 7. He said, 7 years old. Not a question, just those words, like he was placing them somewhere. He said, "I need to think." And he hung up. 2 weeks later, he called back and he asked if we could meet. We met at a coffee shop in a neutral part of town. He was a big young man, broad-shouldered, with his father's jaw but different eyes, softer eyes, his mother's eyes, I suspected. He shook my hand with a firmness that felt like something he had decided. We sat down. He ordered coffee. I ordered water. We sat there for a moment without saying anything. He said, "My father left our house the night my mama confronted him." I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Don't be." He said it without bitterness, but also without any softness. Just a fact. He said, "She told him to leave," and he left. He said, it took him about 45 minutes to clear out his things. He said, that told us something about how ready he already was. I thought about that. A man who could pack in 45 minutes. A man who was always, somewhere, already prepared to leave. Deshawn said, "I'm not angry at you. I want you to know that. I thought I would be, but I'm not." He said, "I've been angry at him for a long time, for different reasons, and this is just one more." He said, "Terence is taking it harder." He said, "My brother is younger, and my brother believed in him differently." I said, "I'm sorry for that." Deshawn said, "Why did you do it?" He said it carefully, not accusingly, genuinely. "Why now? Why this way?" And I had to think about that, because I wanted to be honest, and being honest meant admitting something that didn't reflect entirely well on me. I said, "Because I saw him, and he saw me, and he looked back down at the ground, and he didn't even try." I said, "And I thought about that woman in there who didn't know." I said, "And I thought about you and your brother who didn't know." I said, "I told myself I was doing it for truth, and some of it was, but some of it was something older and less noble than truth. Some of it was just a 7-year-old boy who never stopped being angry and finally found a way to make the man feel something." Deshawn looked at me for a long time after that. He said, "At least you know that." We sat there a while longer. We didn't become close that day. I want to be careful not to make this sound like something tidier than it was. We were two strangers who shared a wound by way of the same man. That's not a friendship. That's not even exactly a kinship. It's something else, something for which I don't think there's a proper word. But we shook hands again when we left, and it was the same firm handshake, and there was something in it that felt like recognition. Just recognition. Two people seeing each other clearly, for the first time. I told Gloria that night, all of it, from the beginning. The street corner, the letter, the phone calls, the meeting. She sat at the kitchen table, and she listened, and she didn't say anything until I was completely finished. And then she said one thing. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I didn't want you to see the ugliness in it." She said, "Samuel, there is nothing you could do that would make me not want to see it." And I cried. For the first time in I don't know how many years, I sat at my own kitchen table and I cried, and my wife put her hand on mine, and we stayed like that for a while without saying anything. That was one of the most important moments of my life, and I almost missed it by keeping secrets. I keep thinking about that, about how close I came to handling the whole thing in the dark and never letting her in, about what I would have lost if I had. Some regrets in my life are about things I did wrong. Some are about things I almost missed. Now, Curtis, I want to tell you what happened with him because it's part of the truth, and I told you I was going to tell the truth. About a month after everything, with Danelle and Deshawn, Curtis called me. I don't know how he got my number. From Deshawn, I suppose, or Danelle. It didn't matter. He called me on a Tuesday morning, and I was in my office, and I saw a number I didn't recognize, and I picked it up, and I heard his voice, and I knew it immediately. Hadn't heard it in 24 years, but I knew it. The voice of the man who told me to stand on a corner and wait. He said, "This is Curtis." I said, "I know." He said, "I need to talk to you." I said, "You had 24 years to talk to me." He said, "I know that." I said, "You saw me on that street a month ago, and you looked back down at the ground." He said, "I know that too." There was a silence. He said, "I don't know what you want me to say." I said, "I don't want you to say anything in particular." I said, "I already did what I needed to do." He said, "You blew up my family." And I felt something when he said that. Something sharp and flat at the same time. I said, "I told your family the truth. What your family did with that truth is not something I caused." He didn't say anything. I said, "Curtis, I have a good life. I have a wife I love and a son who is growing into a good man. And I built that from nothing. I built it from a street corner where a 7-year-old boy stood for 2 hours holding a paper bag." I said, "I'm not destroyed, but I want you to understand what you did. I want you to have to live with knowing that somebody knows." He said, "I live with it." I said, "Do you?" He said, "I have lived with it every day." I didn't believe him, but I also, and this is the complicated part, the part I'm still not sure about, I also didn't not believe him entirely. Because the thing about regret is that it doesn't always look like anything from the outside. Sometimes the people carrying the most damage don't show it in any way you can see. Sometimes they're the ones sitting on walls outside gas stations, staring at the ground. I said, "I'm going to hang up now." He said, "Samuel." I stopped. He said, "I was 23 years old." He said, "I was in a bad way." He said, "I didn't know how to be what you needed." I said, "And I want to be honest about this too." I said, "Those things might be true, but a man in a bad way can call someone, can leave a child somewhere safe, can do 100 things other than just disappearing." I said, "I was 7 years old. I was 7 years old. And I stood there and I waited, and eventually I sat down on the curb and I waited some more. There was a long silence. I said, "I hope your sons are all right." And I meant it. I meant both things, the hope and the meaning of it. Whatever I had felt toward Curtis, his sons were not Curtis. They were just boys who had found out their father was a different man than they thought. That pain was real, and it wasn't their fault, and I did hope they would be all right. I hung up. I sat in my office for a while after that. The city was going on outside the window. People walking, traffic, the ordinary world doing its ordinary things. I thought about Ruth. Ruth, who was gone by then, had been gone for 5 years. I thought about what she would have said about all of this. Ruth was a churchwoman, but not a simple one. She didn't traffic in easy forgiveness or tidy resolution. She understood that things could be complicated and still be right, or wrong, or both at once. I thought she might have told me I had gone about it the wrong way. I thought she might have also understood why I did. Both things can be true. That's something I've learned in 73 years, that things can be wrong and understandable at the same time, that you can do something for real reasons and still have to sit with what it cost other people, that holding someone accountable and causing collateral pain are sometimes the same action. Danelle Beaumont was a woman who did not deserve to be blindsided by a stranger's letter. Her sons did not deserve to have their father's worst secret delivered by mail. I told the truth, and the truth landed on them like weather, and I can tell myself I wasn't responsible for the weather, but I was the one who opened the door. I live with that. I do live with that. Marcus was about 14 at the time, and he didn't know any of this was happening, and I kept it that way deliberately. He didn't need to know. He had his own life, his own concerns, his own growing to do, and the complications of his father's past were mine to carry, not his. But I wonder sometimes if I should have told him later, when he was older, when he was a grown man, with his own sense of things. I never did. I told him about being adopted. I told him about James and Ruth. He knew all of that. He loved them, spent summers with them when they were still living, called Ruth Grandma with a naturalness that made her cry with happiness the first time he did it. He knew the shape of my childhood, the good parts of it, but the street corner, the 2 hours, the paper bag. I never told him those things. Maybe I didn't want him to see that much of the wound. Or maybe I was protecting myself from having to say it out loud to someone whose opinion of me meant everything. Or maybe I thought a father shouldn't carry his damage into his son's life more than he has to. I don't know. Probably all three. I see Deshawn Beaumont occasionally. Not often. Once every few years, we run into each other, or I get a call around the holidays. He became a decent man. Works in construction management now. Has a wife, 2 girls. Terence I know less about. I know he went through some hard years after everything. I know he came out the other side. I know he moved to Atlanta and built something there. I don't know what relationship either of them has with their father now. I have made a point of not asking. Curtis is still alive as far as I know. I don't know where he is. I stopped tracking any of it a long time ago. That part of my life, the active part, the doing something part, that was over pretty quickly in the end. What I thought would be some long campaign of making him feel the weight of what he did turned out to be a few phone calls and a letter and 2 cups of coffee with a young man who was trying to figure out who his father was. Not very dramatic. Real things rarely are. The revenge, if that's what it was smaller and more tangled than revenge is supposed to be. It didn't feel like satisfaction. It felt like touching something hot and finding out it was still hot, even after all those years. It felt like I had gone looking for something, some form of justice or balance, or whatever word you want to use, and found instead just more complexity, more people hurting, more silence in new forms. I used to think I would feel something clean on the other side of it. I didn't feel clean. I felt tired and relieved and guilty in pieces and right in other pieces and glad that Danelle knew the truth and sorry she had to know it and glad that Deshawn shook my hand and sorry that his father made that necessary. A whole tangle of things that never resolved into one thing. 73 years old, and I still can't tell you definitively whether what I did was the right thing. I can tell you it was a human thing. I can tell you it came from a real place. I can tell you that the boy on the corner deserved to matter, deserved to be more than something Curtis Beaumont got up from and walked away from without looking back. But whether I did it the right way, whether Danelle deserved that letter, whether Terence's hard years were something I contributed to, I don't know. I sit with not knowing. That's the honest answer. Gloria passed in 2009. Heart. Very sudden, very fast, the way she would have wanted it, because she had no patience for slow things, for long medical procedures and suffering and being tended to. She went quickly and cleanly, and I was not in the room, and I've never entirely forgiven myself for that, even though it wasn't something that could have been predicted. I was at the grocery store, just getting a few things, and she was gone before I got back. I sat in the parking lot of that grocery store for a very long time. I think I sat there for 3 hours. Nobody knocked on my window. Nobody asked if I was all right. Eventually, I drove home. Marcus came. He was a grown man by then, with his own family, his own life, and he came, and he was good. He handled everything well. He was his mother's son in the ways that mattered. But I watched him, and I thought about how he had her eyes and her way of being impatient with small things, and how I would spend the rest of my life meeting her in him. That's not a bad thing, just a particular kind of ache that doesn't go away. James Calhoun died in 1998, Ruth in 2004. Denise is still living, down in Georgia now with her husband and her grandchildren, and we talk on the phone once a month, and she still teases me the way she always did. The way that means I'm her brother. The way I learned to understand means love. I think about the Calhouns a lot these days. I think about what they did, the scale of it, not just the house and the food and the schooling, though all of that was real, and all of that mattered enormously, but the quieter things. Ruth knocking on my door every night, even when I didn't answer. James sitting at that kitchen table 3 nights a week with his patience. The way they never made me feel like I was a burden or a project or a charity case. The way they just made room. The way they just made room. I don't think I've ever done anything in my life that matches what they did. And I've tried. I've tried to be a good father and a good husband and a decent man, and a person who shows up, and I think I've done reasonably well on most counts. But the thing they did, that simple act of opening a door and keeping it open and making room for a damaged 7-year-old boy who didn't trust anything, I have never matched that. I think most of us go through our lives not matching the best things that were done for us. Maybe that's all right. Maybe the point is to keep trying. Or maybe that's too easy. Maybe that's the kind of thing you say when you're tired and you want to feel better about yourself. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I've thought about it enough that the thinking has worn smooth, like a stone you've handled too many times, and I can't feel the edges of it anymore. What I know is this: I was left on a corner, and someone picked me up, and I built a life. And then I did something with that life that I'm not entirely proud of, and not entirely ashamed of either. And now I'm old, and I sit in this chair in the dark, and I let the night do what it wants to do. And I think about Curtis on that bar stool when I sat down next to him, that fear moving across his face. And I think about whether it gave me what I thought it would give me. And the answer is no, it didn't. But also it wasn't nothing. It wasn't nothing to be seen. It wasn't nothing for a 7-year-old boy who had been invisible to finally make himself visible to the man who had made him invisible. Even if that man just looked back down at the ground, even if that man just picked up his cup and took a sip like everything was fine. Because I was there. I was present. I was no longer standing on a corner waiting. I had walked in through the door and sat down and made myself real in the room. That was something. I don't know if it was worth everything it cost, but it was something. There's a magnolia tree in the backyard. Ruth planted one in the old house on Prescott Street, and I planted one here. I've planted one everywhere I've lived because of her. It's old now, this one, as old as this house, and in the spring it does what magnolia trees do. Those big white flowers, extravagant and brief, lasting maybe 2 weeks before the petals start to brown and fall, and the tree goes back to being just a tree. I sit out there when it's blooming sometimes, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting with the blooming of it, just sitting with the fact that I'm still here to see it. I was 7 years old on a street corner in Memphis, and I made it here, to this yard and this tree and this night. That is something too. That is maybe the most important something. I'm tired now, not the tired that scares you, just the ordinary tired of a man who has been talking a long time, saying the things he needed to say, and is ready to let the silence back in. I'll sit here a little while longer. The refrigerator is humming. A car just went by. My hands are warm. I was here. I was here.